Is Diablo 4 a failure? That's what we're talking about today. The other day, I put out a video talking about how the vast majority of people are not going to be reaching level 100. And it isn't necessarily due to the time commitment, although that does knock out, just by nature of the time commitment, 99% of the players. It's actually due to the fact that the game doesn't really offer too much in the level 80 to 100 process. Now, does that mean it's a failure? I don't necessarily think so, but let's talk about that here because you have a lot of comments from that last video, and I'm going to put them up on screen as we talk about them. But first, what would make Diablo 4 a failure, or rather, what was Diablo 4's goal? We know from the developers that it wasn't intended to be played purely and utterly like a normal ARPG throughout the entire season. They even mentioned it's a good idea to come in, check out the new season, check out the gameplay, play a little bit, and then come back next season. And that's honestly pretty consistent with most ARPGs, but even more so with Diablo 4. Almost like Diablo 3, where many of you played Diablo 3, and if you're more hardcore, the season was kind of over in like 3 days. You were max level, you were beating everything, and honestly, Diablo 4 kind of feels like that as well if you're really pushing hard. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean, again, that it's a failure because, well, a lot of people don't really care about that part. They just want to jump in, play for, 10, 20, 30 hours, and then be done with it. And that's what a lot of people are doing, and they're having fun that way. And so, that's not that big of a deal. But what have you all said about it? First off, we have one from Cacophonic. I've played 3 characters to level 50-ish, and every single time that's about when I hit my limit. The game just gets boring, stale too quick to make the continued grind worth it. And absolutely, when you hit level 50, that's kind of like the first big bump. Around level 45, you jump into World Tier 3 on average. You start slaying some monsters, you get your first sacred pieces, you get a huge boost in power, you start to get your build online, and then, well, you hit another wall and it slows down significantly until you reach tier 4. Granted, for the average player, you may not even be reaching World Tier 3 or 4 for a long time. So this is pretty common. I've seen a lot of people just enjoy the leveling process and then move on to the next character. And, well, I think the game does a pretty good job on that. The renown grind, the ability to use the open world content and run around the map is actually really well designed in the early levels. And so you don't actually really see a couple of the things that many people critique until you actually get into World Tier 3 and especially when you get to World Tier 4. Next comment here by Fatalis Arcs, I believe. No need to reach level 100. I did a tier 100 at level 90, so the game is over for me now. No motivation to do the same thing over and over. The end game sucks a lot. And this is absolutely true. You can definitely see people beating level 100 or tier 100 nightmare dungeons before level 100. And that's just due to how strong some builds are. And maybe that's a problem with the itemization. Maybe that's a problem with the classes and such. Or maybe that's just kind of how the game exists at the current moment, which is that, well, the higher tiers aren't super difficult if you're a hardcore player, but also it doesn't really encourage you to go back and do the whole thing over again because you've kind of already accomplished and everybody's doing the exact same thing. Third comment here by Atari. Feeling really called out as I sit here with 4 level 70 plus seasonal characters. Trust me, I totally get the feeling. I am an altaholic when it comes to other games. In this game, I've actually just stuck with a rogue for like all the characters, and I can't seem to get off of it, but I probably will be swapping over to the druid. I really like the 1 to 50, and I like the 50 to 70-ish, but past that, I just lose interest. Love doing varied things, do events, all this other stuff. That's enough to keep me coming back, but the dungeon grind only lasts for so long. I could do it from 50 to 70, but past that, I'm just tired, don't want to do it anymore, and the let's make a new character hits. This is not a bad thing, by the way. This is totally what the developers, in my opinion, were kind of looking for when they were thinking of Diablo 4 and coming back and just trying out things, hey, play the game a little bit, come back and try later. The 100 grind isn't actually for everyone. So this isn't by nature a bad thing. But the fact that the dungeon grind is just not fun for most people, that is the problem. And so you'll see a lot of people do this where they have several characters, they reach their build and you usually get your build online by like 75 and that's it. And after that point, well, you're kind of done, right? You don't really need anything. You don't really need to min max everything. It's kind of, I don't know, mediocre. And there's another person that commented something else later on that kind of reinforced the whole loot and being done at 75 thing besides min maxing. Another one here by Tommy. Here's the problem. It's not an MMO because it doesn't do MMO things at the end game, and it's a shallow ARPG. It's pretty fun, but shallow. My only reward for hitting 100 is to say I did it. The game really needs raids if they're going to do a MMO thing. I actually really think this comment is interesting because Diablo 4 really did the MMO ARPG split, and it doesn't really do the MMO thing correctly when you really kind of avoid the open world. You're not really encouraged to play with groups unless you're like abusing kind of methods that like spam farm or repeat farm. And if that's the case, well, now it starts to become unfun for most people. And as an ARPG is absolutely right. If you compare it to things like Diablo 2, Path of Exile, yeah, it's a shallow ARPG. I don't think it necessarily needs to be those levels, but that doesn't mean it can't be a little bit more in-depth for those people that want it. The kind of split thing doesn't really make sense to me at this point, based on the direction they've taken this game. So I tend to agree with this as well. Not giving Diablo 4 any room for excuse, but compared to Diablo 2 and Diablo 3, I think there are good improvements. They already mentioned Diablo 4 isn't a game meant to glue you on 24/7 and have goals you want to achieve, and then when you do, you'll probably stop. I do agree the end game loop kind of sucks, and there isn't that dopamine hit. I think D4 will need another 3 to 4 seasons of content and uniques to feel like a complete game. And I think this sentiment where it doesn't feel like a complete game for most people is pretty common. But for this one especially, you kind of get those goals, you move on, right? That is exactly how Diablo 4 feels. And that's exactly how Diablo 3 felt for me as well. And there are some really nice improvements to Diablo 4. I think Diablo 4 is a just better game than any previous Diablo, but that's just my opinion. I know that's not a popular one, but in Diablo 2, there is a lot of replayability that Diablo 4, for most people, doesn't have. And that's pretty important because, well, if you're looking for a game that was meant to be your main game for the future, well, you might be a little bit disappointed. And I have one last one here from Button Dash. I like the game, but I seriously think they need to push it out. They had to push it out and wasn't totally completed. 80 to 100 feels like something missing. Season is mediocre at best. And I really wish they tried a more Diablo 2 style loot. I seriously hope Season 2, they do some drastic improvements. And he also says it's basically Diablo 3 style with convoluted affixes and a sprinkle of D2. So, yeah, I think this is kind of true in that 80 to 100, it does feel like something's kind of missing. You're running in, you're doing the exact same thing over and over and over again, which, to be fair to the other games, is pretty similar to other ARPGs. But in this game in particular, the thing that it's missing, and I went over this in a previous video, is the loot. Okay, and the loot is what makes the grind different. In ARPGs, the grind has always been there. Mapping and PoE, Mephisto runs, these things have always existed. The difference is hitting that loot drop, making it rewarding, making it worthwhile. And things like Uber Lilith in this game, you kill it, you get nothing. But, maybe a cosmetic, which most people don't really care about. You can't repeat farm it. You do a tier 100, well, the loot, guess what? You are better off running like a bunch of tier 70s or tier 60s, unless you could speed farm it, which some builds can do at this point, right? So the problem isn't necessarily the content, it's actually the content that doesn't reward you is necessarily the problem. Or better yet, the content doesn't provide a rewarding feeling, because it's not necessarily not rewarding. You can obviously sit there and min-max your gear, but the key is it's all min-maxing gear. It's not like, oh, you sit there, you drop that big item, you get that big power boost, you move on. It's oh, I just dropped an item. Let me go ahead and enchant it. Let me go ahead and upgrade it, see if it rolls correctly. Okay, now it's a great item. And granted, that's some of that's in other games as well. But there's never really a time where I sit there and I drop like a legendary or a unique, and it's like, oh my goodness, I'm super excited. All of them are the exact same. And as I go through them, the only time I get excited is like when I find a piece that's decent and then I go and roll it and it's actually better. That's when I'm excited, which is a little bit different than other ARPGs. But overall, based on what I'm seeing here, Diablo 4 really isn't a failure. It did exactly what it wanted to do. You know, appeal to the more casual audience. It has done that. Make it so that it has an entertaining gameplay loop, decent combat, solid kind of Diablo style with a pretty good story, I would say. And it's done all that. And then it encourages a little bit to potentially play some of the earlier levels of other classes just to try them out. And then maybe come back for the next season. And as many of people have said, new seasons will bring new content, and hopefully in 2-3 seasons from now, we're going to have a completely different game, and we're going to be talking about a completely different game. But one thing's for sure, the 70 to 100 process, or more specifically the 80 to 100 process, probably needs to be looked at. And honestly, I don't think World Tier 5, as it's been data mined, is something that everyone's going to get on board with and be super excited about, because it kind of just reinforces the same unfortunate kind of grind that we have right now, except it just squishes it a little bit, which doesn't really make the end game fun. It just stalls until you reach that point only a little bit. So I'm not quite sure what we need besides, like, again, a whole loot overhaul slash some sort of option to make your gameplay more rewarding. And again, maybe there's nothing that needs to be done, because I think Diablo 4 has made it for those certain people that want to play that way. But for anyone that wants to play a little bit more, like myself or a lot of you out there, well, perhaps we're just going to have to wait. Thanks for watching, everyone. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Once again, I do read most of them, and who knows, you might end up in a video. I appreciate all the comments that you guys leave behind. I love reading them. Thanks for watching again, and I'll see you all for the next one.